And good afternoon, everyone. We're happy to have you. This is TV Courtroom, hosted by yours truly, attorney Michael X. And I always talk about at the very beginning of each show, we're going to discuss some important issues pertaining to the legal system. And often we go beyond the legal system. We also talk about politics, we talk about current events, we talk about anything and everything that's relevant to the community. For me, in particular, the African American community. And that's true for today. But here's one thing I want to share with you that to me is critically important. I often talk about the legal system because I've been a practicing attorney for about 30 years, actually a little more than 30 years. And during that time, I often talk about how I am the angriest Black man in America. And for those who don't know where that line came from, it came from the great James Baldwin. And it's paraphrasing what he said. He basically said this: to be Black and conscious in America is to be in a constant state of rage. And I agree with that 100%, but I explain what he means or what he meant by rage and what I mean by rage. Rage is knowing what happened. And not only knowing what happened, rage is also knowing that there was never any real justice for what happened. So how do you manifest that rage? You go out and engage in violence and mass destruction? No, you don't, because one, you'll lose, and two, you'll wind up in prison. So nobody will be helped by that. The rage has to be much more focused, much more strategic. When I say focused and strategic, I mean, one of the first things that this evil system of racism did here in America was to outlaw education for Black people. They made it illegal to learn to read and to write. And that was a shrewd decision on their part, because once we were able to read and write, we could organize. And once we could organize, we can mobilize. And once we were able to mobilize, we could attack, whether that's physically attack or intellectually attack. But we had to be able to communicate. By the way, let me just start by saying this. And in a couple of minutes, we're going to have a good friend of mine, a gentleman who's running for judge. He's going to talk more about the legal system. But let me just provide this prelude to that by saying this. As the angriest Black man in America, I want to be able to avenge my ancestors. And when I say avenge, I mean avenge. I don't mean revenge. Revenge means do the same bad thing to the person that the person did to me. That's revenge. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about avenge. And when I say avenge, I mean not so much to focus on the victimizer, the one who did me wrong, but the victim, the one who had the wrong done to him, to her, to them. So when I talk about avenging my ancestors, I mean telling their story and to try to make things right as humanly possible. And the way you make things right is through reparations. And I don't mean reparations in the way that most people think about, where you get some kind of financial compensation for wrongdoing. That might be part of it, but I'm talking about reparations in terms of getting white people to own up to what they've done and to explain that the plight of Black people today is the result of all that. And let me just back up a little more, because I pointed out how pursuant to racism, one of the first things the system did was to make it illegal for Blacks to read and to write. And I don't want people to think that Africans came from the motherland being unable to read and write. Not only were they able to read and write in their own language, they were proficient in that. And if we want to go way back to the beginning, let's start with this. About 300,000 years ago, the Nile Valley region of East Africa was where the first human being stood, where the first human being walked. So when you talk about the beginning of humankind, you're talking about Africa. When you talk about civilization, human beings coming together to organize a system of interaction. Started in Africa. When you talk about algebra and geometry and calculus and medicine and monotheism, you're talking about Africa. So I want to disabuse people of the notion that Black people were swinging through the trees in Africa until a white Tarzan came along and taught them how to read and write, and then made it illegal for them to read and write once he brought them to this other land. We always knew how to read and write. We obviously didn't speak English and write English, so we didn't read and write that. I just want to be clear on that, because I don't want anybody to think that Africans came here as some subhuman species. They came here as the mothers and fathers of humankind, the mothers and fathers of civilization, the mothers and fathers of algebra and geometry and calculus and medicine and monotheism and all of that great stuff. In fact, it's so funny, we talk about Egypt, which by the way is correctly known as Kemet. You go back to look at the hieroglyphics, better stated, the meta nature on the walls of Egypt, and you look at the pyramids. And it's amazing what Eurocentric history has misled us. Not only do they talk about Egypt / Kemet not being in Africa, they call it the Middle East. Damn it, that's Africa. So call it Africa. So the Egyptians, the Kemites, were Africans. In fact, Africa is where Egypt stands. Egypt is in North Africa. The interesting thing is this: when you look at the pyramids, and Europeans today talk about how it's a marvel of intellectual accomplishment. And they said that first, the people from the Middle East did it. Then they had to concede that Egypt is not in the quote unquote Middle East, it's in Northern Africa. And if it's in Northern Africa, that means the Africans created the pyramids. And it got so bad that they said, well, we can't really prove that it was the Africans, it might have been the Martians. So rather than give Black human beings credit for such an intellectual accomplishment, they'd rather give it to the Martians. What does all that have to do with what I'm talking about today? Anytime I talk about race and racism, I always have to start at the beginning. And slavery, damn it, is not the beginning. In fact, slavery is not even Black history. Slavery is white history. Slavery is the interruption of Black history. So I just wanted to start out by saying that when I talk about racism and racial injustice, that didn't begin with the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s. That didn't begin with the battles against Jim Crow in the 30s and 40s. That didn't begin with sharecropping at the turn of the century. That didn't begin with slavery and convict leasing. The beginning for Black people was the beginning of humankind 300,000 years ago. And for about 270,000 years, we did our thing. And again, I know many of you might have been expecting to hear me talk about racism in the criminal justice system. And yes, I'm going to talk about that. But I learned from the great Dr. Edward Robinson, one of the greatest educational administrators and thinkers in Philadelphia history, I'd argue in Pennsylvania history. He said, Mike, every time I see you talking at public events, you talk about the horrors of slavery and you talk about what it caused us to be today. And he would say to me, Mike, that's great. You should talk about the horrors of slavery. But make sure that when you talk about the horrors of slavery, which is the loss for Black people, talk also about the victories of Black people. He said, Mike, what father constantly talks to his children about the father's losses? Any good father is going to talk to the children about the victories. Why? To help the child to achieve victories. Yeah, tell the truth. Tell the truth about when you lost a few times, but don't highlight that. So Black people got to stop talking only about Black history in terms of slavery and racism, because it's bigger than that. If the first human being was on this planet 300,000 years ago, and for 270,000 of those 200,000 years, Black people prospered, then talk about that as the highlight. The history of Europeans as we know them, the Caucasian, began about 30,000 years ago. No disrespect to them, but I just want to put everything in context so that little boys and little black boys and little black girls can know that our victories far outweigh our losses. Now, believe me, it's important to talk about slavery. Why? Because slavery explains our plight today. Slavery explains why we're at the bottom of everything in terms of categories throughout America. You talk about education, bottom, home ownership, bottom, income, bottom, all those things bottom. And the reason is one or two things. One, we're genetically predisposed to be at the bottom, or there's societal implications. And clearly, there are societal implications. And that's what I'm here to talk about. And before we hear from our guests in the next approximately 4 minutes, let me just say this. As a criminal defense attorney, I have to admit, about 95% of my clients are young black men between the ages of about 15 and 25. That would be the demographic of my client base. 15 to 25, 95% of them are black. And we're talking about violent crimes, shootings and robberies and aggravated assaults and, yes, even murders. And people might look at that and say, well, Mike, look at what you're doing. Look at what you're saying. So 95% of your client base involves serious criminal matters, especially murder. Doesn't that say something about the quote unquote thugs and monsters that constitute your client base? In other words, aren't those 15 to 25-year-old criminals, thugs, and monsters? And I listened to the person. I said, you done? And they say, yeah, I'm done. I said, okay. We all have seen the movie or read the book Frankenstein. And despite having read the book or watched the movies, at the end of it, we're talking about what a horrible monster that Frankenstein creature was. But what many people fail to realize is that the so-called monster didn't have a name. You said, well, if the monster didn't have a name, well, where did Frankenstein come from? Frankenstein was the evil scientist who created the monster, Dr. Victor Frankenstein. So that creature, that monster, that thug that raped, robbed, and pillaged along the countryside didn't do that because it was genetically disposed on its own to do it. It was created. That's my client base. My client base is that quote unquote unnamed monster created by America. Why did I say that? It's because I was lucky. I was born and raised in North Philly. Third grade, I got lucky and did well in the citywide test. What does the system do? It takes me out of my third grade school called Pratt Arnold at 22nd and Susquehanna. It takes me out of that under-resourced school and it puts me in Masterman with the white kids. And now at Masterman, I'm on my way to college. I'm on my way to law school. I'm on my way to becoming the man I am today, college professor and criminal defense attorney and newspaper journalist and radio show host. And what does that tell you? That tells you that if my clients today, that demographic from 15 to 25, if they got the same educational opportunity that I got, correction, if they got the same educational opportunity that the kids at Masterman got, then those young black men wouldn't be my clients. They'd be my paralegals. They'd be my associates. They'd be my partners. Think about it this way. This is how corrupt the system is. Instead of the system taking little Michael Cord out of that third grade under-resourced North Philadelphia school and putting him in Masterman with the white kids, so now he's on his way to college and law school, why didn't the system just give the same resources to that North Philly school that they give to Masterman? Because the system is not designed that way. So when you see my clients, don't judge them. Judge Dr. Victor Frankenstein that created them. And who is Dr. Victor Frankenstein in this case? It's very clear. It's America. So I started out by saying I'm the angriest black man in America because I know America and I know American history. Having said that, let's do this. I had mentioned earlier in the show that we have a guest on. And that guest is about to come up now. It is 3:45. And many of you need to know that there are elections every 6 months. Many people think that the elections come up only once every 4 years for president. No, there are elections not only on the federal level, and then you have the midterms, but there are statewide elections, there are countywide elections, there are citywide elections, there are elections of some sort or another every 6 months. And the next election here in Philadelphia will take place in May of this year, May 20, 2025. And it's actually a primary. And I'm going to spend more time after we hear from our guests talking about the primary. But in connection with the primary, there are candidates running for a number of offices, DA and city controller, but for me, it's mostly judges. And here's why. Then I'm going to introduce to you our guests. What I'm about to say might sound like hyperbole, but it's not. And here's what I'm going to say. When it comes to judges, the election of judges is more important than the election of a mayor, than the election of a governor, and even the election of a president. And I say, well, how could that be? They're just judges. Here's the reason. Judges can do 4 things that the mayor can't do, governor can't do, and even the president can't do. 1, a judge can take away your property by imposing a fine. A judge can take away your liberty by throwing you in jail. A judge can take away your children through a custody order, and a judge can take away your life, the death penalty. Those are 4 awesome powers. And we have to make sure we, the community, the public, we decide who gets in those positions. Well, fortunately for Philadelphia, a gentleman by the name of Mike Huff is running to become judge. And let me spend about 30 seconds talking about him and then fire several questions at him to find out why we should vote for him. Well, first and foremost, I'd like to say I know Mike Huff. I've been knowing him for a few decades now. And when I look at lawyers, I always think about the great Charles Hamilton Houston, the dean of Howard Law School and the dean of the civil rights movement back in the 40s and 50s, laying the foundation for Brown versus Board of Education. Dr. Charles Hamilton Houston said a lawyer is either a social engineer or a parasite on society. I can tell you in a few decades I've known Mike Huff, he's clearly a social engineer. He has about 30 years of experience on the state and federal level. He's a private attorney. He's worked as a counsel for the indigent. He's been a volunteer in a number of community-related endeavors, federal reentry program, free expungement clinic, student mock trials, works extensively as a pro bono attorney for activists, including great work he did as an activist attorney for Black Lives Matter. He's actually sued the city of Philadelphia a number of times in connection with its mistreatment of the people who are houseless/homeless, fights for voter registration, does all the right things as a lawyer. And without further ado, my good friend, Mike Huff. Mike, how are you today?
I'm doing amazing. And thank you for having me on your show. This is the second time I believe that we've been on a program.
Cool. Yep.
Yeah. So it's great. It's great to be back again. And happy Black History Month.
Love it.
Something that should be celebrated every day and not just the shortest month of the year. And yeah, again, thank you so much for having me, Mike.
And let me say this, that's why, Mike, I really appreciate you and what you do, because you didn't have to mention the fact that it's Black History Month, the fact that you know that it is and even mentioned it. That to me, it shows your sincerity. You're not pandering. You would have said that to me had we bumped into each other on the street privately. So the fact that you said it publicly, this shows what kind of guy you are. Having said that, Mike, and I just mentioned, it shows what kind of guy you are. There's a series of questions I have for you. Later, I want to get to your judicial philosophy. But one of the things I want to ask you at the very outset is, what's the primary role of a judge? What does a judge do, and what should a judge do?
So, like you, Michael, I have been practicing criminal defense in state and federal court over the past 30 years. Uh, and also, I'm sure, like you, along the way, I've seen good judges and I've seen bad judges. I've seen good police officers. I've seen bad police officers, good prosecutors, bad prosecutors. And so over those 30 years, I mean, and you walk into any courthouse, ask any lawyer, hey, who's the good judges here? How's this judge? How's that judge? And while a lot of it's going to be based on personal experience of the lawyer, in general, those judges are going to have a certain reputation in the court. So, for example, I have seen bad judges, and I can give you examples. Just in treating people with dignity and respect in their courtroom. I was in court one time where the judge it was the call of the trial list. And so they were calling all the names, Commonwealth versus so-and-so. And the first question would be like, the lawyers would normally stand up. That's my client, Your Honor. And the judge would say, is this going to be a trial or a plea of guilt? And the lawyer would answer that question. I recall one specific time, Mike, when I was a young lawyer, that an individual stood up in the courtroom. And the judge said, do you have an attorney? No. Is this going to, and then the judge said, is this going to be a trial or a plea of guilt? And the person answered back in broken English, I don't speak English, Your Honor. And the judge fired back, well, then what language are we speaking now? And, to my surprise, the courtroom, a lot of the people in the courtroom started laughing at this joke, that this judge said to this individual, a judge who probably speaks one language and one language only, mocking someone in court in front of 50 people, and having everybody laugh. So if that person didn't understand what the judge said, now all of a sudden he sees everybody around him laughing. That is not treating people with respect. That is not treating people with dignity. That's not treating people fairly. And in fact, it's quite the opposite. It's a matter of intimidation, if you ask me. So, I mean, it sounds like it should be, it should be the very least the judge could do is treat somebody in the courtroom with dignity and respect and not humiliate them, or even humiliate the attorneys. I've seen it all. They use that power sometimes in a way they should not be. So, with that experience, I know that's not the type of judge I'm going to be. I'm going to treat people with dignity and respect, and make sure that they feel comfortable in the courtroom and that they're going to get a fair shake. If somebody's getting made fun of, also, what they call hometowning, right? Oh, who's your lawyer? Oh, my lawyer's Mike Huff. Mike Huff, never heard of him. Where's he from? Oh, he's from Philadelphia. Oh, that explains it. And they're basically telling the client in the courtroom that,
yes,
they're not going to give your lawyer a fair shake because of where his address is. That makes no sense. If this lawyer was somebody that was referred to you by a trusted person, who cares where their address is? So and like you, Mike, I've seen it over the years. So I've seen what not to do, but I've also seen, good judges, because again, in every profession, there's going to be good people and bad people. And I'm sure, again, you've had this same experience. I'd say about maybe 5 times over the last 30 years, which is once every 6 years. Especially, like I would say, I see it a little bit more in federal court, where there might be an individual sitting inside the courtroom, and the courtroom is rather empty. It's not like state court where it's packed. And most of the people that are in there have something to do with the case. So I recall a judge addressing a person in the courtroom, can I help you, sir? Making sure you're in the right courthouse, in the right courtroom. And the person stood up and said, Judge, you may not remember me, but 10 years ago, I appeared before you as a defendant, and I had hit rock bottom. I was addicted to opiates, and I don't think I'd ever been at a lower point in my life. But, you made sure as my judge that I got my high school diploma, that I got vocational training, that I got mental health treatment, that I got addiction treatment. And today I am married. I have children. I own my own home. I own my own business. And, I have a brand new life. And I just wanted to come in and say, thank you. And man, when you see something like that, it really, again, has an impact on you. Like judges can be, as you indicated, socially responsible and make people's lives better instead of just throwing people in jail. I mean, that should be the last thing that a judge would want to do. So again, I one of the reason I'm running is because of this great, experience that I have, and of being in the courtroom every day and seeing not just my cases, but other people's cases too, and learning from that. And I hope to be one of those judges that when somebody walks into the building and says, "Hey, can I trust Mike Huff to be fair and impartial and give me a fair shake and not put their thumb on the scale of the government or the state?" They're going to say, "Yes, Mike, you can trust Mike to be fair and impartial," the very bottom that a judge should be. So yeah, that is my answer in a nutshell, Michael.
Those of you who are tuning in, you're looking at and listening to Mike Huff, an attorney with 3 decades of experience running for judge. And he and I are having a conversation about why folks should be interested in and support his candidacy. He explained the role of judges, and I love the way he broke it down. Over my right shoulder, you see Malcolm X, and Malcolm has this thing where he used to say, "Make it plain." And although all of us as lawyers who are lawyers know Mike Huff as a big time, well-established attorney who can use multisyllabic words if he wants to, has decided to make it plain, as Malcolm talked about. And he explained to us that dignity and respect are the 2 primary roles of a judge. And I love the way he broke that down. Next, Mike, you kind of alluded to this, talking about the gentleman who was sitting in the federal courtroom. What is restorative justice, and does it play a role in what a judge should be doing, at least on the criminal side? We'll talk about civil later.
Absolutely. And I think you're going to see, Mike, that's going to be.
And keep in mind, Mike, what about the quote unquote bad guys who do bad things? Tie in restorative justice there.
Sure. No problem. Thank you. Yeah, I think restorative justice is the future, quite frankly. And that I think that's going to hopefully be the primary solution, if you will. I mean, the way the system works today, and I get it, it's kind of set up this way. When a person gets arrested, generally, whether it's a crime of violence or property damage or something along those lines, they of course have the right to remain silent. They have the right to be proven, to have a trial where they are presumed to be innocent, don't have to testify. You have the 6th Amendment and so on and so forth, and the 5th Amendment that gives you all these rights. But, what the studies have shown is that restorative justice is actually the best way of handling those conflicts between, let's just say the victim and the offender. And what those studies have shown is that when you bring those 2 people together, and that's not the system we have now, they're kept separate. Okay. There could be a protective order where the victim and the offender cannot talk to each other, can't even look at each other. And really the most that the victim has is maybe a victim impact statement at the end of the trial, if the person is convicted, for example. And then that's it. Now, again, there are some restorative programs that are going on in prisons throughout the United States, but essentially what that does is it brings those 2 people together. And, the victim gets to talk to the offender about how that crime has affected their lives. Again, whether it's property damage or a physical assault, and how they suffered from that. And I'm just going to say the offender, I don't really, the defendant, let's just say the defendant, gets to hear how their actions impacted another person, and, hopefully develops empathy, in that process. And, the restorative justice programs have shown that the reoffenders are much, much lower when somebody has gone through the restorative justice process. And, the person who was the victim also is in a position where they're able to heal and also to make sure and feel comfortable that what happened to them is not going to happen to another person. Now, of course, that means that those two parties need to get together, and in essence, the defendant would have to give up sort of their right to remain silent. So there are some technical difficulties, that would need to be, figured out. And I know they do have a restorative justice program at the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office, and I believe Jody is one of the people that's in charge of that. But Mike, this is just like the war on drugs, which really should be a war on poverty. Again, I remember, I'm sure you do too, that if somebody got arrested for a, drug case, whether, they were selling to support their own habit or what have you, just a possession case. And, sometimes they would relapse while on probation, and there'd be a violation hearing, and the judge would sort of take it personally. Oh, I told you not to use again, and you did, you're going to jail. The science tells us, Mike, that people are going to relapse. That's just, in fact, they may relapse multiple times, before they stop, or it may just be a lifelong problem that they're going to have. But the system needs to understand the science, and we need to use that science to help people get better and not just give them one chance when we know that whatever 90% of people in addiction are going to relapse. Okay, well then we have to understand that and give them the support and the encouragement and the tools that they need to make sure that doesn't happen. So I really do think, the court system, the law lags behind society, lags behind science in many cases, because they're just so used to doing it the same way. And to change how, people are just reluctant to change. It's just sort of like the nature of the beast, if you will. And I think really the court system, judges really need to embrace change, because what we're doing is not working. It's a mass incarceration system in the United States. We all know that it's not working. People are not coming out of prison rehabilitated. They're coming out and in many cases reoffending. So we need to apply science to the courtroom, and make sure that people are protected and that they feel that they've been heard, of course, and also that the offender can understand and empathize with the victim so that they're less likely, to reoffend in the future. And I really, you talk about reparations, reparations means to repair, and that means to repair a relationship. Okay. And that's not only between, a victim and an offender. That could also be the state and an offender. About the Holmesburg, acres of skin, University of Pennsylvania experiments on Black people at Graterford Prison, and the experiments that the Nazis did, and experiments that white people did on Black people, and the same thing that is even happening today. Women in birth, giving birth, have higher rates of mortality. Doctors assume Black people can take more pain than other people. This, racism is obviously alive and well. It did not go away when Barack Obama was elected president, as we all know. It permeates every system. We just found out that the way Pennsylvania funds its public schools is unconstitutional, something we all knew from the beginning. So, we need to repair the harm that the state has done to individuals as well. That means that the state needs to be the one that empathizes. The state needs to be the one that takes responsibility. The state needs to be the one that repairs that relationship. Some people want to get rid of critical race theory, out of schools. That's not facing what you've done as a state, as a nation, to individuals. So, restorative justice applies more than just to the courtroom. It applies to the government. It can apply to the classroom, where kids can learn to resolve their differences in school, basically in the same way. That's going to help end the prison to pipeline, the school to prison pipeline that we now face. So, yeah, I think you're going to see, Mike, hopefully, maybe after you and I are long gone, that restorative justice is going to be the norm, and then incarceration is going to be a thing of the past. I am an abolitionist, and to me that means getting rid of systems of oppression, and prisons are systems of oppression. Police are systems of oppression. If you can imagine living in a society without police, without prisons, I mean, wouldn't that be amazing? So I think that really needs to be our goal, and the question is, how do we get there? How do we get, in England, I don't believe the police carry firearms. Here in America, it's a lot different. We've got more guns than people. And honestly, I don't know how we solve those kinds of problems, but we need to listen to science. We need to listen to the experts. We need to have them involved. And they say if the only thing you have is a hammer, then all your problems look like nails. And we have got to put down the hammer, Mike.
Great stuff, folks. You're listening to Mike Huff, 30 years of trial experience as a state and federal attorney here in the Pennsylvania area. Mike Huff is running for judge. He's going to give us information about his website and contact information later in the show. But before we jump to the next question, I want to talk specifically about your judicial philosophy, Mike. Let me play the devil's advocate going back to this restorative justice. People might say, well, I'm listening to Mike Huff. He sounds like Mike Cord. He sounds like Jody Dodd. He's got this touchy-feely thing. There's some bad guys out there who do some bad stuff. What do you say about them? What's your response?
Yeah, well, again, I've sort of had those experiences, and this is how they teach law school, right? They don't tell you memorize this, memorize that. They tell you stories, and you kind of figure it out. I remember a client I represented who was accused of attacking someone on Halloween. And it was a person that was walking, with their daughter, trick-or-treating. And this person was, assaulted by someone else. And, when I was interviewing my client, I said, well, what was the reason? Why did this happen? What are we supposed to tell the judge? And my client said, well, the guy looked at me funny. And I'm like, well, there is self-defense, right? We all know that. There are justifications, that are recognized under the law. But having someone look at you funny isn't a justification for attacking, a father while he's, trick-or-treating with his daughter. And my client, I said, that's not the law. And my client said back to me, well, that's my law. And now that's a tough case because this person is kind of operating under their own, their own system. And it's, you can't have that, obviously. People have to, abide by, the law, obviously. They need to follow the law. And if they don't care, if they're not going to have empathy, then you are in a position where you have to protect people from society. And I do think people can change, but I guess there's going to be a small number of people that simply can't. But that doesn't mean that we put them in solitary confinement. That doesn't mean we treat them inhumanely. That doesn't mean that we violate their constitutional rights while incarcerated. I think these people, they need that therapy, and that's what I've been saying, Mike. People, whether you're for housing justice and you're an advocate of public housing for everyone, or you're a healthcare advocate and you're an advocate for healthcare for all. The only place in America where you can get free housing, where you can get 3 square meals a day, where you can get free healthcare, where you can get job training and mental health treatment and substance abuse treatment for free is in prison. That, and that should not be. I mean, there's homeless people out there that would, rather be arrested and sleep in a jail overnight than out on the street. And we can't be a society that just provides those basic necessities only when you go to jail. That makes no sense at all. Those things need to be provided from day one, not afterwards. So yeah, I think the system is kind of turned on its head right now, and that we really need to right the ship as quickly as possible. And we're only going to do that, with people who understand that, first of all, and that are that see it that way. And, don't just go along to get along because it's always been like that.
Mike, I love the way you address that. I've noticed in my experience, I do have some quote unquote bad guys who've done some bad things. But here's the common denominator, Mike. For all those guys, there's clearly a mental health issue. There's clearly a drug addiction issue. There's something going on. The most egregious the crime, the more some issue took place as a child or a young adult. I don't believe that anybody is born genetically as an evil, wicked person. I believe things happen, and I love the fact that you said, hey, let's look into mental health. Let's look into drug addiction. Let's talk about therapy. I think that's key. Basically, Mike, you pretty much answered what was going to be my next question, but if you want to follow up on it, you can. It was going to be, what would be your judicial philosophy? And you pretty much gave us that information with your previous answers, but in one or two sentences, how would you describe your judicial philosophy?
Yeah, again, I would say, and these all sound like pretty basic things that you would, oh yeah, judges are supposed to be like that. Everybody knows, but unfortunately they aren't. Not everyone is like that because, again, there's good people and there's bad people. I think it's so essential, again, just from the start, to treat people with respect and dignity and not try to humiliate them. Or, how many times, Mike, have you had a client who said they wanted to go to trial and, they decided they were going to plead guilty, and I'm, filling out the questionnaire, asking them the questions that I'm required to by law. And I say, has anybody forced, threatened, or coerced you into, pleading guilty? And they say, yeah, the judge. Well, they're talking about physical coercion, not legal coercion, but it's still coercion. If somebody wants a jury trial, if they want to be heard, if they want to have their story told in court, that's what you're there for. Of course you're going to try to resolve cases because you can't compromise after a trial's over. You got, if you're going to, whether it's a divorce, whether it's personal injury, you're always going to try to come to a compromise at first. But if you can't come to that compromise, and that's really why I focus my practice so much in Philadelphia, because I really do feel that the judges there, at least, you say, Judge, I want a trial. They're like, let's go. Yeah. Like, we got a panel downstairs, bring them up. Let's get this process started. Whereas in some counties, they'll hold you there till 4:00, tell you to come back the next day, and they'll try to run out the clock on you. But yeah, I think treat people with dignity, treat people with respect, and honor their decisions. If they want a jury trial, that's what we're there to do. Try cases. And don't penalize people. Yes. Oh, you went, the trial penalty. Oh, well, you went to trial, so, we're going to give you more time for, obviously nobody says that, but, that's something you always have to be concerned about as an attorney. And I remember back in the days of mandatory minimums, 5 to 10 years, we would go to trial, and after it was over, the judge gave my client 5 to 10 years. I'm like, whoa, we got the trial for free. You didn't have to pay a premium for it. Thank God. Because, sometimes that happens, and it shouldn't. It should never happen. You should never pay a premium for exercising a constitutional right.
I was supposed to be having an interview with Mike Huff, but it's more like a conversation. It's that smooth and fluid, and that's how it's supposed to be. I had a whole list of questions for him, but the way he's rattling off this information, he's providing me with the type of information that the listening audience needs. So I don't have to go through my list of questions. In addition, we're running out of time. So, Mike, we got about maybe 5 minutes left. This show is the TV courtroom, and in many courtroom proceedings, certainly in trial proceedings, at the end, there's the opportunity for a closing argument. So we're going to give you your opportunity for a closing argument within the next, say, 3 to 5 minutes, depending upon how much time you need. But Mike, before you give us your 3 to 5 minute closing argument, if folks want more information about you and who you are and what you're doing, is there a phone number, website, email address? How do they get more information?
Sure. Probably the easiest way is to contact me through our website, www.huffforjudge.com. There you can get all the information that you need. You could sign up to help us, contribute, get signatures for our campaign, but that's certainly the easiest way is right on our website.
Appreciate that. So Mike, the 3 to 5 minute closing argument clock begins now.
Thank you. So, I take this responsibility very seriously. I do not consider it a birthright. I am first generation college graduate, first generation law school graduate, first generation candidate for office. So, this was really something I never thought, was there for me. It's not like my uncle was a judge or my grandfather was a judge or, something along those lines. I come from very humble background. My dad grew up in poverty, lived in foster homes. And, I think, he was able to, get, that American dream and kind of get out of poverty and, enter the middle class, if you will. But, knowing that, that my dad grew up in poverty and 90% of my clients also grew up in poverty, I feel like I was very lucky not to be, have a father who was incarcerated, for example, and also recognizing my privilege as a white man, that I'm sure played into those factors of why my dad kind of came out of poverty without, ever having problems with the law. So I take this responsibility very, very seriously. I would not be running if I did not think I could be fair, I could be impartial, and that I could treat people with dignity. I am not. One of the reasons why I'm a criminal defense attorney, Mike, was when I was in for a very brief period of time when I was in law school, I worked in the Camden County Prosecutor's Office over in New Jersey, and as a legal intern, without being a lawyer, you were allowed to try juvenile cases. And I did try a juvenile case as a prosecutor. It was an assault case. It was pretty open and shut. It was not a hard case to prove. And, the defendant was convicted and was sentenced to a juvenile, detention. And, it really kind of made my stomach turn. Like I did not want to be a part of that process that that incarcerates people. And that is really, unfortunately, that's part of what a judge, has to do. And I take that responsibility incredibly seriously. I think there's other people, Mike, those bad judges that I've talked about that almost take glee in it. And that should not be the way it is. You should not take glee in taking someone's freedom away. So, again, I've seen good judges, bad judges. I want to be one of those good judges. I want to be one of those judges that doesn't, just have a hammer. I want to be one of those people maybe where someone comes into my courtroom one day and thanks me, for taking a chance on them and not being scared to take a chance on somebody. I even talk about Judge Lisa Rao. If you recall, Mike, she stood up. She was one of the judges that questioned the veracity of police officers who came before her. And as a result of that, she got criticized in the press, criticized by the DA who was there at the time. And, history turned out to prove that she was right, that those same police officers all ended up being charged with corruption. It takes courage. It takes courage, to stand up to the state and to stand up to public scrutiny. People often say, well, who polices the police? Well, judges police the police if you have the courage to do it. And again, I'm not prejudging. I'm not doing any of those things, but I'm just saying, you have to have courage, to maybe do what's unpopular if you know that it's the right thing to do. And I hope that I'll be able to bring that to the bench here in Philadelphia.
I got to tell you, if I were the foreman of this jury, I'd certainly rule in your favor, Mike. Great position, great argument. Your pursuit of justice for the past 30 years proves that you're the right person for the job. I'm going to be reaching out to you sometime before May to come back on this show and also to have you on my radio show on WURD 96.1 FM. But Mike, I want to thank you for the time you spent today, but more important, thank you for the great work you do for those who need that done. If there are people out there who need an advocate, someone who generally pursues justice, you are that guy. For more information, folks, contact Mike Huff at huffforjudge.com. That's HUFF, huffforjudge.com. Mike Huff, thank you very much. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thanks for having me, Mike. Go Eagles.
My pleasure. Well said. Great stuff from Mike Huff. And folks, we got about maybe 6 minutes left. And in the final 6 minutes, I want to encourage folks to read an article that I wrote in the Tribune. It's actually going to be in this coming Sunday Tribune. That would be Sunday, February the 9th. However, it'll be online tonight. So, and we really appreciate Riley, our producer / engineer extraordinaire. He has up there phillytrib.com. So anytime this evening, after let's say 6 p.m., just go to phillytrib.com and check out an article I wrote. The article is entitled Judges Matter in the Current and Real Battle Against Fascism. Once again, the headline is Judges Matter in the Current and Real Battle Against Fascism. And I'm going to spend a couple minutes talking about that. But before I do that, we really enjoyed having Mike Huff on. And by the way, if there are any other candidates out there of any party, any judicial philosophy interested in being on my show, whether it's here on TV Courtroom or on Radio Courtroom, contact me at michaelcordx@gmail.com. That's michaelcordx@gmail.com. And I'd like to set up an arrangement to have you as a guest if you're running for judge here in the city and county of Philadelphia. Once again, it's michaelcordx@gmail.com. In the last, say, 3 or 4 minutes, folks, in regard to that article I mentioned, Judges Matter in the Current and Real Battle Against Fascism, I point out why it's so important to be serious when it comes to deciding whether you're going to vote for or against somebody running for judge. And we don't have time for me to go through the whole thing in connection with this article, but let me just start maybe on paragraph 6 or so of the article. And it goes on to say that that's precisely why you must know which judges, that's precisely why you must know which lawyers are running in the May 20 primary election to take the first step to become judges 6 months later in November. It's also why you must know which current judges will be seeking retention in the November general election. So when lawyers are running to become judges, that's an election. When judges are seeking to keep their position, what we lawyers call retention, that's retention. So what I've done and what I do before every judicial election, whether it's a primary to decide who's going to represent the party or a general election, who's going to win outright, I always put together a list recommending who we should vote for and who we should vote against. And here's what I write here in our final 2 minutes. Voting for judges is more important than voting for any other political candidates. And that's because judges can legally do what mayors, governors, and even presidents can't legally do. In fact, judges have 4 preeminent powers. And I go on to explain the following. When I use the phrase preeminent powers, I truly mean it. That's no hyperbole. And when I say judges have more powers than mayors and governors and presidents, I truly mean that too. That also is no hyperbole. Unlike a mayor or a governor, even a president, a judge has at least 4 life-altering powers. 1, and I touched on this earlier. 1, A judge can take away your property by way of a seizure or forfeiture order or by way of a fine. So number one, a judge can take your stuff. Number two, a judge can take away your children through custody orders. Judge can say, you're not a fit parent. I'm taking your son away from you, Dad. I'm taking your daughter away from you, Mom. A judge can break up a family. Number three, a judge can take away your liberty by way of an incarceration order. What does that mean? Judge can lock you up. Think about that. Lock you up. You are thinking that you're going to come home to see the family. You're going to go to work tomorrow, and the judge puts you in jail for 3 months or 3 years or whatever. So a judge can literally take away your freedom. That's number three. And finally, number four, a judge can take away your life. Think about that. A judge can take away your life through a death penalty order. Wow. How much more power is that? Those four powers we put in the hands of people running for judge. Shouldn't we know about those persons? And I put together a group called JTJ, Judging the Judges. And before these candidates for judge can be endorsed or elected, they have to answer these 10 questions in the right way. Number one, why do you want to be a judge? Number two, what are your qualifications? Number three, what's your judicial philosophy and what role, if any, does restorative justice play in that? Number four, how long have you been a lawyer? Number five, what type of legal work have you done in the past 10 years? Number six, how many jury trials have you handled? Number seven, how many bench trials have you handled? Number eight, how many appeals have you filed? Number nine, which organization do you belong to and why? And 10, what type of pro bono work have you done? Because we want to know that you're not just in the business of law because it's the business of law, that you're in this business to make change. Like the great Charles Hamilton Houston said, a lawyer is either a social engineer or a parasite on society. For more information about the stuff I'm working on, follow me on Instagram, on Facebook, on X, formerly known as Twitter. Check out my radio show, WRD 96.1 FM, Radio Courtroom, and check out all my articles in the Philadelphia Tribune. Big shout out to our producer / engineer extraordinaire, Riley, and we thank you for tuning in. I'm going to end today's show like I end every show. It goes like this. Think black. I'm out.